With Plato, Horace, Aristotle all out of the way, we finally move into the Romantic period in criticism. As I said earlier, Quintilian is not in the syllabus, so we'll be skipping Quintilian and moving on to Longinus. And it's Longinus, actually, it's not anything else. Apparently, it's pronounced Longinus. Okay, when we talk about Longinus, the thing is that the most famous work is on the Sublime. There's actually a lot of debate or discussion regarding this because throughout history there's been, I believe, multiple, two or three Longinuses, writers by the name. So this, a discourse on who actually wrote it, but we'll be looking at the claim where he wrote in the Romantic period. Now, the thing with Longinus is that he is complicated. When you look at his view on literature is not as simple as Plato saying it should be used for study or Aristotle saying it should be used to enjoy. His view on it is okay. Let me try to explain it this way. If we believe what Plato said was right, okay, let's just assume what Plato said is right. That means literature, a good poem or a good poetry has to teach, and only poems that are didactic, that teach, that serve a utilitarian purpose are good. If that is the case, then the works of Aristotle or the works of Horace wouldn't have been famous. So we can say Plato was wrong. Now, if we look at Aristotle, Aristotle said, it is imitation, yes, but it is for the joy. Poetry should serve a hedonistic purpose. It should bring us pleasure in reading, and only works that do so are good or famous. Then if he was right, then Plato's works wouldn't be famous, right? Because they do not serve pleasure. And Horace is also wrong in this regard because he doesn't, even though he finds a middle ground, there are a lot of works that don't fit his bill that are still famous. So we can say ultimately neither of them, none of them actually fit the criteria of what a good literature is. If that is the case, what is it? What do all of these works that became famous have in common? What separates a great work from a mediocre work from a bad work? And according to Longinus, it's sublimity, the idea of sublimity. Now, actually defining what sublimity is by word is difficult. It's like, it's like one of those words that you feel. It's like it's supposed to be something along the lines of feeling it in the inside. It's aesthetic in one way. I'll try to explain it. It's written here, sublimity, according to him, according to Longinus, sublimity consists in certain distinction and consummate excellence in expression. And it is from this and no other source that the greatest poets and prose writers have gained their eminence and immortal fame. Sublimity means to a certain distinction and consummate excellence in expression. You see, it's like the way the work is expressed by the author, it has its innate, inherent excellence and its uniqueness in it. The effect of a lofty passage is not to convince the reason of a reader, but to transport him out of himself. That's the important part here. A work, according to Longinus, a work isn't supposed to teach or to give you pleasure or to, make you question things. It is supposed to make you leave yourself and get transported into this work. It's almost as if you're leaving your physical body and being one with the work. You you start feeling what the poem is talking about. You see the things that's in the poem, you hear it, you feel it. That's what he's doing. It's like I wouldn't say spiritual, it's like an innate experience that comes from within you, not it aims at persuasion. Okay, it casts a spell invariably an admirable speech casts a spell over us and eclipses that which merely aims at persuasion and pleasure. It's not just trying to persuade you into learning something or trying to give you pleasure. It takes over you completely. You get obsessed with this work. You become one with the work basically. Now, the thing with him is that he never said that all works should be like that. He just said no, he didn't even say good works are that. He said out of the few works that you will read in your life, very few will actually meet this. You will once read a work, you will once read a poem, you will once see a movie or hear a song. That will, completely take over you. It will get stuck in your head. You will constantly think about it. It becomes a part of you. That's what it means to write a good work, according to Longinus. Not instinction or delight or persuasion, instruction or delight or persuasion, therefore, is the test of great literature, but transport. Its capacity to move the reader to ecstasy caused by an irresistible magic of speech. So it's almost like a poet is a magician who can charm the reader and make him be transported from from their physical state to the work. That's what it means to have sublimity. The influence of the sublime act with an irresistible might and get the upper hand with every reader or hearer, whether he will or not. That's the skill there. Even if, okay, for example, if the work is about something I have no understanding of, no correlation about, I don't know anything about. For example, the work, if I'm starting to read a work and the work is about some historic events that happening in China 6,000 years ago. I don't know anything about that, right? I have no background information. I have no connection to any of the characters there. But a great writer, according to Longinus, will be able to form the work in such a form that I will get connected with that situation, with the characters. It will feel like I was there when I read it, right? That's how, powerful a great writer can be. There should be innate quality and creativity in it, and that's what is preferred more. Now, where does the sublime come from? That's the source of the sublime. Both nature and art, says Longinus, contribute to sublimity in literature. Uh, Howsoever, it was the business of art to bring it to light. Art, thus far from working against nature, cooperate with the same. So, it's almost like what Horace said earlier when we talked about nature and art. The skill and talent. It's kind of the same here. He believes art, far from working against nature, art and nature aren't against each other. They work together. And here by nature, he does mean actually the nature around us, human nature, the nature of humanity, the nature of animals, the world around us, that nature. Now, its free and independent nature might be the nature works according to a system. And this is like a huge flaw that is later studied in the romantics. When you talk about the opposites, when someone says classicists, the opposite is romantics, right? Because classicists work by a set rules and romanticists are art for art's sake. However, if you look at romanticism is based on nature, right? And if you look at nature, nature isn't sprawling for the sake of sprawling. Nature has its own rules that it abides by, right? And nature is not just an independent system. Nature is in an interconnected system, and in this interconnected system, art plays a role. Art exists. Now, with this as his premise, art is perfect when it seems to be nature, and nature hits at the mark when it contains hidden art inside of it. It's beautiful, really, if you think about it, because an art, we see a lot of modern art nowadays that even we question, right? Like, what does this mean? This makes no sense. And there might be some pretensions. People are like, this means that, and it goes above and beyond the mind. Mostly, it's just BS. Art is perfect when it seems to be natural. It has a tint of nature in it. It can speak to the soul, and nature is at its best when there is hidden art in it. The most beautiful things that we'll see in this world are natural. It doesn't have to be human made. It doesn't have to be artificial. Mostly, it's very hard to create something as beautiful as like a dawn near an ocean, or like a high rising mountain among the clouds. It's like that beauty, that's inherent beauty. No one created that beauty. That beauty existed within nature. So that's what Longinus is saying. Art and nature they go hand in hand. They exist with each other. With this in mind, with this at his premise, Longinus finds five principal sources for the sublime. So the first two, which are largely the gifts of nature, and the remaining are gifts of art. So, like exactly as Horace said, if you have to look at true expression of a poet or an artist, it has to have a combination of the innate and the built, the natural and the artistic. So the five natural principal sources he believed are grandeur of thought, capacity for strong emotion, appropriate use of figures, nobility of diction, and dignity of composition or happy synthesis of the preceding gifts. They sounded complicated, but it's very easy actually when you understand it. I'll just say, okay, imagine I'm a poet and I want to write a poem. Okay, I just had an idea. Okay, I woke up today morning. I want to write a poem. The first question I'll ask is, what are you going to write a poem about? Like, what is the theme? What is the topic here, right? That is the grandeur of thought, the thought from which the poem actually comes. That's it. Second is capacity for strong emotion. So okay, I finally decided a theme or a topic, that being, as I said earlier, sunrise. So if I'm going to write a poem about sunrise, I have to write about what I feel about sunrise, right? Because I'm writing my own view on sunrise. I'm not going to write a purely theoretical or a factual work, although I can, but mostly poem is about exhalation of the senses, right? So what do I feel about the sunrise? What does sunrise make me feel? And that is the capacity for strong emotion, the strong emotion within me that correlates to this theme. Next is the appropriate use of figures. Okay, so now I have a theme. I know what I'll write about. Now the part comes of how I'm writing it. So the first two parts, the natural parts are over. Next comes the parts of the skill, right? And when we come to the skills, the third is appropriate use of figures. Like, what figures am I using where? Because according to these poets, it is that, you know, when they start writing, a huge part of poetry is actually the the figures of speech, the ornamentation that you use in these works, right? The metaphors, the similes, or the ascenditons. I believe there was a huge list here. Actually, he might, yeah. Ascenditons, theoretical questions, hyperbaton, periphrases, these poetic figures, right? So I choose that because, for example, if I did, okay, I chose sunrise as a theme. I chose my emotions towards sunrise, right? Now, what am I connecting that sunrise to? And the words I choose will depend on that. Am I connecting sunrise to the beauty of life? Then I will use personification, right? The sunrise will almost be humanified there. If I'm relating sunrise to a love, a sense of love, if that's towards a person, it will become a metaphor or a simile. If it's toward nature, my love towards nature and appreciation of beauty in life, that would be something like, almost, let's say, it will still be metaphor, but it will be more, on the ironic side, where I'll question the purpose of life, the necessity of life, and how life exists in a flow, and how I am a part of that nature. So, like, the theme and the idea, the strong emotions that you use will heavily, work upon this words. And the first part of the words is the figures. So now, once I've chosen the figures, I'll choose the words. That is the nobility of diction. Like, these two can, sometimes feel similar. Okay, how's figure of speech any different from diction? Isn't figure of speech just diction? Yes, but the difference between a proper word and a figure of speech is that a figure of speech will have multiple layers of meaning, while as the proper use of a word is just the word itself. It means a single thing. So once I've chosen the figures of speech and I've chosen the nobility of diction, finally is dignity of composition, where I bring it all together. Now we'll go into one by one. The first is the grandeur of thought. And Longinus believes that nobody can produce a sublime work unless his thoughts are sublime. For sublimity is the echo of the greatness of soul. That's an important line, you can quote it. Sublimity is the echo of greatness of soul. The sublimity, it has to come from within your mind. The thought comes from within your mind. No, it is impossible for those who live their whole lives full of mean and servile ideas and habits to have a sublime idea. Your mind has to be pure. Your thoughts have to be pure. Then only you can get pure thoughts. That's what he's saying. Stately thoughts belong to the loftiest mind, mostly are innate, a natural condition of the writer's mind and heart, but they can also be acquired by proper discipline. So he's saying you can either develop, you can either naturally have a lofty, innate, sorry, not a lofty, you can naturally have a mind that is, pulling towards this artistic side. We say, we call people, he was born talented, or she had this innate quality within herself. That can happen, either that, or this can also be developed by proper discipline. Longinus isn't gatekeeping and saying only people who are born talented can have can have these sublime ideas. He's saying that you can either develop that by having it innately, instinctually, having that from childhood, from birth, or you can develop that by proper discipline. It is good for us to, when we are working at some subject which demands sublimity of thought and expression, to have some idea in our minds as to how Homer might have expressed the same thought. This helps us look back to history, right? Because the moment where I sit back, disconnect from everything, and start thinking about the ideas that are in my head, I am connecting to a great history where people throughout humanity have been thinking about things like this. Now, linking sublimity of expression with sublimity of thought. That's as we said earlier, it is once I get this thought that I can start connecting this thought to the emotion of what I feel about it. Now, next comes the capacity for strong emotion. Now, these emotions are natural in lofty and they are elevated. Nothing makes so much for grandeur as true emotion in the right place. If you look at best example being, if you take movies, some of the most strongest movies, some of the best written movies, the strongest parts in those movies are the parts where the characters are expressing their emotions in the truest and the rawest form, right? Whether it be happiness, whether it be sadness, whether it be anger, whatever. It is those parts that captivate us. It strikes us to the core. Now, once you have the great thought in mind, the best way to bring it to light is through the usage of emotions. A strong emotion, stately thoughts, stately emotions, as it may have seemed, also belongs to the loftiest mind. They equally lead to loftiness of utterance. There is a reconnaissance of grandeur of subject, thought, and lofty style. And it's like a lot of fancy words are being used here, but basically that's all that it means. Once you have a strong thought, you need strong emotion to go by it, because once a strong emotion comes, what did we say about strong emotion when we talked about Aristotle? Once the strong emotions come, there will be catharsis. There will be a purgation of all these emotions, and mind reaches a clean slate. This is a cathartic effect. Now, third is the appropriate use of figures. When we talk about the appropriate use of figures, of the artistic age sublimity, the figures of speech occupy the largest space. Use of figures of speech makes all the difference in producing grandeur works. There's like a lot of filler that's written here. It starts from here. The appropriate use of figures start from here and goes all the way till here. No, but the thing basically there's a lot of again filler words that's used here. All he's trying to say here is use your figures of speech properly. Don't overuse it. Don't underuse it. Hide tough words in these figures. Use style and flow to properly lead them. Figures aid the effect of sublimity, but they are used best when naturally arise. And this might not apply to everyone, because we aren't used to appreciating the artistic side of life in this modern world. But for someone who appreciates art, you might have seen this among your friends, or people if there is someone who is very much into the art of words, which being it could be literature, as in poetry, it could be prose writing, a novel writer, it could be a poet, it could be someone who watches movies a lot, someone who listens to songs a lot. They might, ironically or unironically, sometimes without even knowing, use figures of speech, use, metaphors, use similes in their life a lot, very commonly. This is because they have that natural tendency to the artistic use of language, and for those people, those he believes have that innate quality of expressing natural grandeur thoughts. Once you have that, while you're writing, these figures of speech will come to your mind whether you want to think about it or not. And when they come, that's the best space to use it because it came to you naturally. So once these figures of speech come to you naturally, you can apply them. Next is the nobility of diction. So once the figures of speeches are there, we have to fill in the rest of the parts, right? That's where the words come from, diction. He talks about the use of metaphors and ornamented language and the proper choice of words. Words, when suitable and striking, have a moving and seductive effect upon the readers and are the first things in style to lend a grandeur, beauty, mellowness, dignity, force. Okay, what he's trying to say is that again, he is proving his own thing here, right? You have to use grand language. That's what he's doing here. These words, basically all he's trying to say is use correct words in the correct place. That's all. You have to know what words to use where. Don't go overboard on your words, but don't underperform on your words. Don't impose strong language in every occasion. However, don't just because you think people might not understand a word, don't make you don't let it make you not use the word. Use whatever words you feel are naturally fitting in that, and whatever words can convey your thought the most properly. Metaphors being the language of passion, passion alone and arbitrary role can determine how many to have. He's saying here, I believe he was asked a question once, how do you know when a figure of speech is too much or not? He's basically saying you can't know that, right? That depends on the work. But It's an inherent feeling, right? You will know when you do it. You will know how it feels, how you have to stop, when you have to stop using these figures of speech or not. Now, the thought is done, the emotions are done, the figures of speech are done, the diction are done, and finally the dignity of composition, which basically means the combination of all these four. Lastly, Longinus considers the arrangement of words. It should be one that blends thought, emotions, figures, and words. It has to blend the all earlier four, the preceding four elements, into a harmonious whole. A natural power of persuasion of giving and of giving pleasure, but also the marvelous power of exalting the soul and swaying the heart of men. He's saying that once all these four have come together properly, you fit them in correctly, it will have a natural power to persuade your mind and give you pleasure, but also it will move your soul. It will strike a chord in your heart. It makes the hearer or the reader share the emotions of the speaker. You start relating with it. If the elements of grandeur organized into a compact system and still further encircled in a chain of harmony, they gain a living voice by being merely rounded into a period. They come together. That's what he's trying to say. Once all these four have been put together properly, it will become a great piece of work. A harmonious composition alone sometimes makes up for the deficiency of other elements. That's important. He's saying of the earlier four, even if you are missing one, as long as you have the other three and you mix them whole together properly, those four can actually make up for the lack of the one. A harmonious composition alone sometimes makes up for the deficiency of other elements. Now, if I take a look at the notes, in text, that's all. We are not going to his romanticism or his value of criticism. And again, compared to Plato and Aristotle, Longinus and Horace are pretty short. Sublimity is lofty and excellent creation with power to please, persuade, or move the readers. It is achieved by properly handling of nature and art and of the five essential sources as we taught earlier. And there is power in forming great conception, a grandeur of thought in writers. So that's all there is about Longinus. And Longinus is the only Roman we are looking at. We are skipping Dante. We don't have Dante. And we quickly skip on to the neoclassical period, where next time we'll go on a slight introduction on Renaissance and cause of rising criticism during the age. Then we'll move on to Philip Sidney.